Welcome back. We cover our action from the final 2 rounds of the National Cross Country Championship Racing Series down here in KZN, the Virginia Trails, and on board with Lee Thompson showing us how tight things are in the sugarcanes. The regional warriors were out in force. They went out in batches of 3, and it was straight out, elbows up racing from the gate drop as they went out on the exact same track as the national superstars as well. Into the first of the gnarly wooded sections, and Brett Swanepoel had clear air and was running off the front. It was so important for him at this stage to have gotten that whole shot and be topping the charts coming out of the prologue. It meant everyone else was chasing into the dust. He was happy to lead off the front, making some nice early passes. Brad Cox had got through on Goodside. Goodside had crashed in the early stages and was not going to be a show-up for the rest of the day. Charon Moore was now up into third and first of the big bangers in the OR1s, putting light between himself and his championship rival, Kenny Gilbert. Dav Cocker was on his wheel as well as second of the little bikes in the 250s, trying to close in on a top run in the overalls. The Forest giving us a real good highlight of the skills and a nice mix as well. Calvin Hume showing us what it's all about. The Blue Crew trying to stay out of the mud. And in the lowland section, no one wanted to go for a bath, even though the temperatures were high. I'm pretty sure they would have liked that a little bit later on when racing was wrapped up. For Coley, an early crash showed that he had to straighten up his bars before he carried on into the mix. He was still running high in the top 3s for the OR2 category. Brad Cox was ripping up the fields at this stage though and starting to close in on the overalls. Jared Katsia was good, but not as good as we've seen him in the past. Something was missing from the man that was joint points leader in the OR2's red plate style. The open terrain here showed what the bikes could really do and what a layout they were treated to. Some of the best riding in the world. Everyone had been looking forward to this, and in a way they didn't want to race it. They just wanted to ride this awesome terrain, world class, as we saw them popping up and out as if they were racing out in the mountains of Austria. Kenny Gilbert was there, but he was in second place on the big bikes and could not close in on the back wheel of Charon Moore in the early running. The man that's in the fight for third place in the OR3s, Ryan Peltzer, was doing a good job to hold his station and stay ahead of JC Nienaber. Nienaber was in a two-way fight for third place in the big bangers between himself and Veinard Delport. Calvin Hume was slowly building pace, getting himself used to where he was lined up, and himself and Coley were going to be robbing points from some key players, namely Taki Bodgiorgis. He was in a fight for third place in the OR2 for the championship. Back on board, you can see how gnarly things are. This was an actual technical climb. A lot of rocks and a lot of loose dirt as well, just skirting on the edge of the forest section. A little bit more enduro than a lot of these cross-country wide-open players are used to. Coming up on the back wheel of Pepper. Pepper got caught out on the climbs at round number 1 in the mountains of Lesotho. He also got caught out on the rocks here. His teammate and stablemate, Thompson, giving him some words of encouragement. Eric Merry had looked good in the second half of this season and was also trying to challenge his way inside of a top 3 for the OR3s. Ian Rawle, who has been amazing on the regional front, was once again on the back foot as far as the nationals go. He was trying to break his way, though, inside of a top 10. Gilbert showing us how it's done in style all the way on the back wheel of the big Husky 450 up the hills. Round number 1 winner from the mountains, Dylan Cox in the high school 125s, was doing a great job, but the momentum in that championship was in the hands of Matty Wilson. Cole was still there in the mix, and he was trying to see what he could do as far as the OR2 championship goes. Brawl needed to get a move on and try and make some passes on the local superstars. Wilson was building his way up the order, at this stage still on the back foot, behind Dylan Cox, but eventually he would close in and start making the pass. That was Veinard Delport in that two-way dice for third place in the championship for the big bangers between himself and JC Nienaber, and Taki was trying to grab all those points on the plate. The man that is unbeaten on the championship tour so far in 2020 was Wade Blau for the seniors as he tried to stay ahead of the rest of the field. There was really no one to match his pace. Carl McKenzie had a big ouchie going across, just lost his handlebar going into one of the drop-offs across the riverbed, was lucky to walk away without injury. I felt that one. I think he did too. Greasy little rocks and the only little tiny bit of water up for grabs on the circuit. As the riders closed in towards the end of the laps, already the leader had come through. Remember, this was going to be a 5-lapper race. Hydration was key. It was a short pit as well, so if the rider was close behind, you'd be able to look across and check him out. 2 KZN kids were running 1 and 2 at the moment. Brett Swanepoel, leader in the overalls and leading in the OR2s. Second on the road and leading in the OR3s was Brad Cox. Cox was trying to see what he could do. Calvin Hume rolled in not far behind him as well. So Hume was building pace as the race got more familiar for him. Remember, he is generally a rock hopper. Dav Cocker looked a little bit on the back foot, unable to run the exact pace as Cox this time around. Shake of the head shows that something was not lacquer, as they say. Check out the fast spanners in the KTM squad, though, as Jazz Kutsia came in. A fast fuel and air filter change, making sure the thing was breathing smooth, clean air. Big hydration coming in for Jazz. Just not able to get on that exact pace as Brett Swanepoel, and it was to be expected that Swanepoel was going to be a ripper down here. Just used to running this slightly different kind of funky terrain down in KZN. Kenny also looked slightly out of puff as he was in the dust as well, regretting not pushing harder in the time trial and having to line up 9th in the queue, sucking a lot of dust in the early laps. He was still sitting second, though, in the Big Banger class. Kenny obviously had an absolute perler of lap number 1. Remember, the fight was going to be between the 2 red plates of Moore and the former champion Gilbert. Gilbert's taken a couple of championships. Moore has yet to get his big number 1 plate. That was JC Nienaber trying to hang on to the lead for his 3rd place battle, and a 450 going up against a 125. Dylan Cox was still leading for the RBS Yamaha squad as the Husqvarna of Wilson was closing him down. Blau was in sublime form once again, out-qualifying absolutely everyone out there. Farmer had gone back to his 300. Remember, at the Rhino Park round, Farmer was on the big 450 that didn't really gel with his style. He was back on the old dog, the 300 Smoker, and looked much more comfortable going into this event. The open terrain was misleading. If it was open, it meant you were doing big descents and big climbs. And if you went into some of that old sugarcane, there was 0 grip. A couple of riders learning that the hard way. Kochi was down there as well, trying to see what he could do in the battle for the senior championship, but these descents catching a couple of riders out. Remember, it is totally different terrain in KZN than we race around the rest of South Africa and the racing regions, especially the hard pack of Gauteng, where it's pretty much switching between 5th and 6th gear the whole way through. This terrain was a mixture of 3rd and 4th, and sometimes 2nd when you had to hit some of the big climbs. The riders making mincemeat of the technical sections, but even Brett Swanepoel, the great Brett Swanepoel, showing that he wasn't infallible. He was making a couple of mistakes in the rocks, trying to find some sweet lines to try and climb the way through. Remember, Brett races on the cross-country and the Enduro Championship, as does this man, Brad Cox. And I think that mixture of racing the high speed and the technical has played into their hands and shown what they can do. And that's why they were running light years ahead of the rest of the field. Similar scenario for Calvin Hume, although he'd been a little bit stretched on the high speed stuff. For Dav Cocker, this would have been a big test for him. Remember, he's a motocross crossover kid, so he's good at pinning it wide open, but those little legs on the tech hold him back a little bit. On lap number 2, Jared Kutsia looked like he was starting to come to life and close in on the bikes ahead of him. Same story for Kenny Gilbert. He was fine in the groove. And this old school kind of terrain was playing into his hands. It was now a big dice as well, because no one wanted to give away the championship points lead. This was round 3 of the championship, meaning it was the tiebreaker. In the 125 high schools at this point, Matty Wilson had got himself into the lead of the 125s as he stayed ahead of Taki Bodgiodgis, while we went a little bit further down the hill to see a very rare mistake from the almost unstoppable Wade Blau in the seniors. He was still in the lead though. On the second loop, that was a massive climb. Unfortunately, the camera just doesn't tell the tale. Maybe the body language of Cox will though. Having to hang it all off the back, get that traction down, working hard to get the power down on the back wheel for the 250. 1, 2, and 3 at this stage were Swanee, Cox, and Cocker. Calvin Hume got his fueling strategy a little bit off and had to walk it all the way back in. He'd have lost a ton of time there. And at the end of day number 1, it was Swanepoel at the top of the charts. That meant there was 1 red plate going into the final round. He had the advantage over Jazz Kutsia. Not just that, he had won his category as well as the overall. along with taking a huge crash. Cox followed him in for the number 2.
Very tough day, so I think tomorrow's going to be even tougher. Track's quite roughed out now, and yeah, we're just going to have to try and recover tonight and push hard for tomorrow.
Was the injury going to be a factor for day 2?
Quite a fast section. I tapped front brakes and I washed the front, landed on my arm, and literally from there it was just, yeah, really sore in that. So I bumped it a few times and that didn't help it either, but yeah, we'll make it better for tomorrow.